The bouquet hit the marble floor with a sound too soft for the moment it shattered. White roses rolled toward my shoes, petals brushing the hem of my dress, and before anyone could bend down, a folded note slid across the aisle and stopped against my heel. I picked it up without thinking. My fingers were shaking. The church smelled like lilies and polished wood. The organ went quiet like it was holding its breath. Mom, don't let this happen. My name is Evelyn. I'm 56. When did a mother's silence become the most dangerous thing in the room? I looked up. My daughter stood frozen at the altar, her smile still painted on, eyes glossy, fixed somewhere past me. Her fiancé, Daniel, had one hand resting lightly on her back. Familiar. The same hand that had traced the edges of our land maps at dinner, that had laughed and said, "So much space, so much potential." I remembered how he smirked when I changed the subject. How he joked about property taxes like it was foreplay. The priest cleared his throat. A guest coughed. Someone behind me whispered, "What's taking so long?" Daniel leaned closer to my daughter and murmured something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. The ribbon from her bouquet was still looped around her wrist, tugging like a quiet alarm. The church felt smaller than a hallway. The stained glass saints stared down, unblinking. I folded the note slowly, carefully, as if any sudden move might break her. In that silence, a truth settled in my chest, heavy, undeniable. Love doesn't beg in whispers. Fear does. I stayed seated, but the note burned through my palm like it had weight. The priest repeated the question, slower this time. "If anyone has reason." His voice echoed too loudly. Somewhere a chair creaked. It sounded like a warning. Daniel's jaw tightened. He smiled at the crowd, that polished, practiced smile he used whenever someone mentioned the land. The one that said, "I already own this." I watched his thumb press into my daughter's spine. Not enough to bruise. Just enough to remind. At the engagement dinner, he'd laughed when I said the acreage was protected. Protected how? He'd asked, eyes sharp. Everything has loopholes. My husband had kicked me under the table. I'd gone quiet. I thought keeping peace was love. Now my daughter's breathing was wrong. Too shallow. Her veil trembled. I knew that tremble. It was the same one she had when she was 8 and lied about breaking a window, hoping I'd step in before the truth hurt her. Daniel leaned toward me from the altar steps. "Evelyn," he whispered, still smiling, "everything okay?" I nodded once. "Why?" My throat tasted like metal. The note crinkled softly when I folded it again, smaller this time, like I was trying to hide it from myself. Behind me, my sister murmured, "Don't make a scene." Beside her, my brother checked his watch. The organist's fingers hovered, unsure. The silence stretched until it hurt. My daughter finally looked at me. Not pleading. Not crying. Trusting. That was when I realized something colder than fear had taken hold. If I stayed quiet now, I wouldn't just lose my daughter. I'd be handing her over. I stood up slowly. The pew creaked beneath me loud enough that a few heads turned. Daniel's smile flickered. Just for a second. He hadn't planned for movement. Men like him never do. "Evelyn," the priest said gently. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on my daughter. Her lashes were wet now. She gave the smallest shake of her head. A warning. Or maybe a plea not to make it worse. I stepped into the aisle anyway. The carpet felt softer than it should have, like the floor of a place you don't come back from. Daniel cleared his throat. "This isn't necessary," he said, low, controlled. "We talked about this." As if I'd agreed to anything. As if months of him circling our land like a buyer at an auction counted as family conversation. I reached the altar steps. The note was still in my hand. I unfolded it but didn't read it again. I didn't need to. My daughter's handwriting shook in a way mine never had at her age. "Mom," she whispered, barely sound at all. The room leaned in. I could feel it. Even the air felt curious. Daniel laughed softly. "She's nervous," he said to the guests. "Big day." That laugh did something to me. It scraped. It reminded me of the night he'd toasted our future and said, "This land will carry my name someday." Like it was already done. I placed my hand over my daughter's. Her skin was cold. Too cold. "No," I said finally. One word. "Come." Flat. Daniel's fingers tightened on her back. "What did you just say?" he asked, still smiling. In that moment I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transfer of ownership. I said no, I repeated louder this time. The word moved through the church like a draft. Someone gasped. My sister's sharp inhale cut the air. Daniel finally let the smile drop. It didn't fall far, just enough to show irritation like a mask slipping, not breaking. This is not the place, he said quietly, leaning closer to me now. I smelled his cologne, expensive and deliberate. You're confused. Confused. That was his favorite word for women who didn't cooperate. I turned to the priest. Please give us a moment. The priest hesitated. Protocol battled instinct. Then he nodded and stepped back. The organist closed the lid of the keys with a soft click. That sound felt final, like a door. Daniel's hand stayed on my daughter. She flinched when he adjusted his grip just slightly. I noticed because I was finally watching him, not the version of him I'd allowed into my home. You promised, he said to me under his breath. After the wedding. After. Everything was always after with him. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded document I'd carried for months without courage. The land deed. Dated. Pacted. Locked tight in a trust he could never touch. I hadn't planned to bring it today. My hand must have known before my mind did. His eyes dropped to the paper. Just for a second. The ribbon from the bouquet brushed my wrist, still looped around my daughter's hand, trembling between us like a thin line of truth. Daniel straightened and laughed louder now. This is ridiculous, he announced to the room. If she doesn't want to marry me, she should say it herself. Every face turned to my daughter. And she opened her mouth. I can't, my daughter said. 2 words. Barely audible. But they landed harder than the bouquet. Daniel froze. Not shocked. Calculating. Like a man watching a deal slip but still hoping to renegotiate. His hand fell away from her back, slow and deliberate, as if he wanted the room to believe he'd never been holding her at all. What do you mean you can't? He asked softly now. Danger soft. He swallowed. I felt it beside her, the way you feel a storm change direction. I can't marry you, she said again, stronger this time. Her fingers tightened around the ribbon. The same ribbon that had been tied carefully that morning, like a promise she wasn't ready to break until now. A murmur rippled through the pews. Someone whispered Daniel's name. Someone else whispered mine. My brother stood halfway, then sat back down. Cowardice has a posture. I recognized it. Daniel laughed. Not the polished laugh. A short one. This is about the land, isn't it? He looked at me, eyes narrow. You filled her head. I said nothing. Silence can be an answer. He turned back to her. You're throwing away security, he said. A future. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. Like fear was theater. My daughter reached for my hand. Her palm was warm now. Steady. I already threw away enough, she said. Daniel's face hardened. The room felt colder. Somewhere in the back a phone buzzed. Life intruding on collapse. That was when I knew this wasn't over. Men like him don't lose quietly. They collect receipts. Daniel stepped back from the altar, straightening his jacket like this was just another meeting that hadn't gone his way. Fine, he said loud enough for everyone. If this is how your family handles things, then let's be honest. His eyes swept the room, then landed on me. Evelyn never trusted me. She never wanted me in this family. A few heads nodded. Familiar faces. People who preferred clean stories over true ones. He turned to my daughter again, softer now. You'll regret this, he said. Not a threat. A promise. You don't know how the world works without me. That was the line that finally broke something open. I remembered the nights he'd stayed late, claiming meetings, while asking casual questions about zoning laws. The way he'd photographed the land during Thanksgiving like it was scenery, not inheritance. The lawyer he'd recommended. The prenuptial he'd pushed, then dismissed with a laugh when I asked questions. I reached into my purse again, slower this time, and pulled out my phone. There's something you should know, I said calmly. Daniel stiffened. This really isn't the time. I pressed play. His voice filled the church. Recorded. Clear. Laughing. Once we're married, the trust won't matter. I'll find a way. They always do. Silence slammed down hard. My sister's mouth fell open. My brother stood fully this time. The priest crossed himself without realizing it. Daniel's face drained of color. The chair behind him scraped as he stepped back, misjudging the space. It looked absurdly like it had been waiting for him. And in that moment I felt something new settle in my chest. Not anger. Clarity. No one spoke. The recording ended with a soft click, too small for what it had done. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around, searching for an ally, a laugh, a way out. The room offered him none. "This is illegal," he said finally, voice tight. "You recorded me without consent." I tilted my head. "You sent it as a voice note," I replied. "Come." To my phone. Asking me to understand the plan. A few people shifted. Someone in the front pew stood and quietly moved away from him, as if distance itself were a judgment. I noticed how quickly loyalty reorganizes when truth is loud. Daniel's eyes found my daughter again. "You knew about this?" he asked her. She didn't answer right away. She picked up the fallen bouquet instead, gathered the scattered roses and held them against her chest. "I knew enough," she said. "I knew I felt smaller every time you smiled at my mother's land. That did it." Daniel's face twisted, not with rage but with exposure. Like a man realizing the room can finally see him. He grabbed his coat from the chair that had betrayed him and stepped back down the aisle alone. The sound of his shoes echoed too long. No one followed. The church doors closed behind him with a heavy, final thud. The quiet afterward wasn't relief. It was anticipation. Because I knew something he didn't yet. Walking away doesn't end a story when paperwork still exists. And his name was about to disappear. The church emptied slowly, like people leaving a dream they weren't sure how to talk about. My daughter changed out of her dress in the small side room, hands steady now. She folded the veil carefully like it still deserved respect. I waited outside holding the bouquet, the ribbon still looped around my wrist. I didn't untie it. Some warnings are meant to stay visible. 3 weeks later, Daniel's lawyer called. The trust documents had already been filed. The land, every acre he'd measured with his eyes, was no longer transferable by marriage, influence, or charm. His firm, the one he'd bragged would expand once the wedding settled, quietly cut ties after the recording circulated. Not publicly. Freely. Reputation has its own language. I never confronted him again. I didn't need to. Revenge didn't come as shouting or ruin. It came as absence. As doors that no longer opened. As his name slowly evaporating from conversations where he once smirked. One evening months later, my daughter and I walked the property at sunset. The land was quiet. Honest. She wrapped the old ribbon around a fence post and laughed softly. A sound I hadn't heard in too long. "You didn't save me," she said. "You just listened." I looked at the horizon, the way the light rested gently without asking for anything back. That's when I understood. Protection isn't control. Love doesn't rush. And silence, when broken at the right moment, can change everything.